इंडिया स्पीक्स डेली को सब्सक्राइब करें, उसके बेल आइकन को ज़रूर दबाएं यदि आपको इसकी पत्रकारिता पसंद हो। धन्यवाद।
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to India Speaks Daily. The Supreme Court of India, the country's apex judicial body, finally seems to have taken some sort of a call regarding the ongoing anti-CAA, that is Citizenship Amendment Act protests at Shaheen Bagh in Delhi. Responding to a petition filed by Advocate Amit Sahani and Delhi BJP leader Nand Kishore Garg on the traffic disruption caused due to the ongoing protests at Shaheen Bagh, due to the ongoing anti-CAA protests at Shaheen Bagh, the Supreme Court made a strong statement. It strongly ruled that although people in a democracy have all right to stage a protest, they do not have a right to hold the lives of citizens to ransom. They do not have a right to hold the day-to-day lives of citizens at ransom by indefinitely holding a protest at a public spot. That is, they do not have a right to cause inconvenience to others by blocking the road, by blocking a public property. So basically, the Supreme Court, this is a strong indictment by the Supreme Court with regard to the public inconvenience caused at the Shaheen Bagh protests, due to the Shaheen Bagh protests. However, the court stopped short of delivering a verdict. It did not really give a final order on the evacuation of the protesters from the protest site. It rather said that it would wait for all the stakeholders concerned. It would wait for responses from all the stakeholders concerned, including the Delhi government. And therefore, the next hearing has been fixed for February 17, where the court is expected to reach a final decision with regard to the Shaheen Bagh protests. Now, this is certainly a positive development. This is certainly a positive development in the sense that there has been some sort of an acknowledgement by the Supreme Court on the anarchic nature of these protests. And although the Supreme Court has, as I said, stopped short of delivering a verdict on the protests as such, but at the same time, it is certainly an indictment of the self-righteous nature of these protests, in which the so-called right of the protesters becomes sacrosanct, becomes paramount, and everything else, including the rights of those who are traveling in that area, the rights of those who live in the vicinity, who are not taking part in the protests, their rights become sort of subservient to the rights of the protesters, and they become almost non-existent. So this kind of self-righteousness has been challenged by the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court, the apex court, has also clearly said that the protesters should protest in designated sites, in specific sites earmarked for protests, but they cannot hold an entire road to ransom, which is a public property, for indefinite periods of time. So this is definitely a positive development, as Supreme Court has given a strong indictment of these situations. So basically, the protests, as I said, they're conducted in a very self-righteous manner, and to anyone who questions this sort of inconvenience being caused, comes the classic self-righteous retort. And this is the classic ploy by the left liberal media, the classic retort all the time, that when the lives of people are at stake, when their personal identities of Muslims are at stake, when they're scared that they'll be thrown out of the country, their entire lives are at stake, then how could you talk about so-called inconsequential things like people not being able to reach on time for their work and children not being able to reach on time for their school? So this is the classic ploy. However, to refute this, let us remember that even people to whom inconvenience is being caused by the protests, even on that front, on that ground, there are larger issues at stake. It is not just as simplistic as people getting late for school or work or other routine activities, but there could be people who need emergency treatment. There could be sick people who have to be taken to a hospital, and because the road is blocked, they cannot get to the hospital on time. There could be old people who have to travel somewhere urgently. So lives are at stake here too. So this completely sort of refutes the baseless argument by the left liberal media that the protesters have their entire lives at stake, the identities of Muslim people are at stake, and therefore small inconveniences caused to other people should not be looked into, should be entirely dismissed. Now, and it is not just the lives from the other side, to remind you, which are at stake. The Supreme Court at the same time, through a separate bench, was also hearing another petition filed by a child, by a child who had recently won a bravery award, a 12-year-old child. And this petition was basically regarding the very unfortunate incident of the recent death of a 4-month-old baby, death of a 4-month-old infant who had gone to attend the Shaheen Bagh protest with his parents. So this infant was regularly being taken by his parents to attend the protest at Shaheen Bagh, and he reportedly died when he came back from the protest because of chest infection and constant exposure to cold. So it is this constant exposure to cold and unfavorable conditions that led to the death of the infant. So the Supreme Court bench also issued a strong statement with regard to the death of the infant and posed a rhetorical question that how does one justify a 4-month-old infant going to protest? Does a 4-month-old infant have any right? Does he or she have any agency that he or she wants to protest? So the Supreme Court came out very strong on the protesters, and it also came out very strongly against the lawyers who were arguing for the protesters and giving stupid reasons to basically giving stupid reasons to politicize the fact that a child had died because he was attending the protest, and infant, basically trying to justify the involvement of children in these protests. So regarding that, the Supreme Court has come out very strongly. Now, even in this situation, as I said, the left liberal media is playing its dirty politics. The print has carried a rather shameful, vitriolic article on this saying with the title, "Supreme Court don't care for Shaheen Bagh children more than their parents." So this is the headline. Now just look at the misleading headline, and then what the article does. The article, through skewed manipulation of logic, questions the prerogative of a child to file the petition on the issue. So the article then puts a spotlight on the 12-year-old petitioner, the child petitioner, who is a bravery award winner, and the article then tries to question the agency that has been imparted to what the child petitioner is saying. The article cleverly tries to manipulate logic in order to prove that the child, whatever the child petitioner is saying, in this case is politically maneuvered, it's politically manipulated, and the court shouldn't take it very seriously. Now just look at the double standards of the left liberal media here. It's the same left liberal media, if you recall, which in the case of the when the whole debate about the ban against firecracker burning on Diwali was going on. In that case also, the petitioners were children. The petition against the burning of firecrackers, citing the damage done to children's lungs, was made by school children around the same age group as this child. And at that time, the left liberal media had a completely different stance. At that time, it was rather celebrating this cause. At that time, it was rather applauding these children for bringing out such an important issue in the public domain, for being conscientious citizens of India. And at that time, it was making an entirely opposite argument, that children their views should not be debunked just because they're children. Rather, their views should be taken seriously. So it was on the basis of a petition filed by these 3 children that the entire firecracker ban episode had happened. And now look at the kind of flip-flop, the kind of U-turn that the left liberal media has taken. The same left liberal media which was espousing the cause of children at that time now has problem with a child filing a petition with regard to the anti-CAA protests, with regard to the misuse of children at anti-CAA protests, just because these protests are anti-CAA protests. So the left liberal media completely changes its stance as per its convenience, and the double standards are completely evident here. And I quote from the print article, like God supposedly does, the Supreme Court of India works in mysterious ways, the print article says, even as we lament the fact that it has delayed deciding on important petitions involving the violations of people's fundamental rights. The Supreme Court has acted upon a letter written by a 12-year-old against the involvement of children in Delhi's Shaheen Bagh protests. So while issuing notices to the Union and Delhi governments after an infant died at the protests, the court asked, was a 4-month-old child there to protest? And the article continues, well, it's easy to answer why an infant was at the scene of protests, but harder to answer to what extent should older children make and be used to make political and public arguments. So just look at the way the opinion piece very cleverly presumes and throws this very biased judgment at the readers that the child in this case was used to make a political and a public argument. And again, without any concrete evidence, and forget the word concrete, without any evidence whatsoever. And this is a classic ploy of the left liberal media to forcefully grill things into people's minds purely on the basis of ideological assumptions without any factual evidence whatsoever. And as I said, in the case of firecrackers ban, there were school children around the same age group, and at that time the left liberal media had not seen any political conspiracy behind the children filing that petition. So what happened to the left liberal media this time? It sees a conspiracy here just because it is the BJP and it is the anti-CAA protests happening. The Shaheen Bagh protests, unfortunately, have become a hotbed of dirty politics, with all sorts of people jumping onto the bandwagon. Film stars, wannabe social activists, pseudo-left liberal social activists, the TV crew, there's media, there's publicity. So there's basically a proper spicy concoction. There's a complete cocktail of gossip, there's a cocktail of controversy, there is drama, there's everything. So there's basically an entire humor-mongering narrative there that is waiting to be hijacked by people that can lend footage, that can lend reel to films, it can lend sort of reams and reams of footage to 24/7 news channels. So there's an entire drama going on there, which has been orchestrated by the opposition parties, which has been orchestrated by the left liberal media and the pseudo activists for their own gains and mileage. And unfortunately, sadly, it is the disadvantaged sections of Muslim society, it is the poor Muslims who are being used as pawns in this drama, as they are standing there night and day. The women in burqas are standing there night and day. They're forced to stand there and they just become pawns. The children are getting susceptible to cold and the children are dying. But the poor, disadvantaged sections of Muslim society are being mainly used as pawns by others to basically settle their scores with the BJP government. Because the whole CEA, anti-CEA thing is just a facade. The forum is being used to instill all sorts of irrational fears in the mind of Muslims. It is being used to attack BJP on all conceivable grounds, be it unemployment, be it poverty, etc. So basically, the Shaheen Bagh protests have lost their legitimacy as a civil society protest movement. Because in a democracy, of course, a protest is necessary. Everybody has the right to protest in a democracy. In fact, a healthy protest makes sure that all laws made in democracy do not favor anybody, that they do not exclude anybody disproportionately. So protests, as I said, are essential to healthy survival of a democracy. But these protests, when they enter the political domain, when these protests are hijacked by politicians, when they are hijacked by film stars, when these are hijacked by pseudo-secular liberal social activists, and when they are hijacked by the pseudo-secular left liberal media, then these protests no longer advocate a legitimate cause of the civil society. Then these protests become an orchestrated, hollow political drama like a soap opera. And this is precisely what is happening in the case of anti-CAA protests happening at Shaheen Bagh. These have simply become a BJP bashing ground. These have simply become a place for anybody and everybody to come and politically campaign against BJP. So this has become, the Shaheen Bagh has become, unfortunately become a sort of a political campaigning ground against the ruling government. Because when protests are happening, any legitimate protests are against a particular issue. But in the case of Shaheen Bagh protests, the issue of CAA is nowhere to be seen. If you ask people, they do not have a clue about what they are protesting against. They do not even have, even if they want to talk to the government, they do not even have a sort of a fixed kind of agenda. They do not even have a fixed charter of demands that they want to be fulfilled from the government. There is no fixed leadership. The leadership is vague. The only thing that is happening there is that everybody is being pretty much told that BJP is bad for the Muslims. BJP is poison for the Muslims, and all sorts of opposition politicians are coming there and saying these things and seizing the platform. So the protests, the Shaheen Bagh protests, sadly have lost their legitimacy as valid civil society protests, as I said, and they've entered the anarchic space, and they've basically sort of completely evaporated into chaos. A valid civil society protest is against an issue, not against a political party or an entity. It doesn't get overtly political. It doesn't ask people not to vote for any particular political party and openly campaigns for other political parties. And I would like to end this by quoting from this article in Times of India. I read this article online, which points out what a political spectacle, a farce, the Shaheen Bagh protests have become. So I quote, Shaheen Bagh protests are said to have given way to a death procession for the funeral. This has become a piece of news and is being termed as a good gesture, winning the hearts of people around. Frankly speaking, of Hindus of the area. So has a stage come when even the minimum rights of the habitats are on the mercy of the people and becomes a matter of compassion and empathy on the part of people who are free to do whatever and wherever they like? It is becoming clearer day by day that Shaheen Bagh and CAA protests are totally misplaced, misguided, and without any solid ideological base. It is largely dependent on imaginary apprehensions and baseless fears. It appears that the sole agenda is, or at least has become, disturbing and demeaning the BJP dispensation, and the issue of CAA has just come in handy.